Good morning and welcome to this new webinar created and organized by the Research Foundation Flanders, better known of course as FWO. I'm Hans Willems, Secretary General of the Research Foundation, and together with three of my colleagues, Steven, Dirk and Inge, all three of them policy advisor at FWO, we would guide you to the selection and evaluation procedure of the SB Fellowship Grant 2022. So welcome, and before we actually kick off with this webinar, I would like to remind you that actually it's an interactive webinar. That means that you can ask us questions live by making use of the question button that you can find on the right-hand side of your screen. We will do our best to tackle as many questions as possible during the webinar, but be assured that afterwards we will provide you with a detailed answer by email on all your questions that you may have. The target group of this webinar are the new and current expert panel members. So I would like to address a warm welcome to all the new members among us and who joined us here this morning. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation of becoming a panel member of FWO. And yes, of course, we hope that we can offer you some interesting discussions and interesting insight into the Flemish science landscape. During this webinar, you will learn more on the evaluation and selection process of the PhD fellowships, your specific tasks as a panel member, and of course, we will focus on the evaluation criteria and the scoring criteria, reviews, feedback, in short, every specific step during the evaluation procedure. We will also take into account issues brought up by you, the current panel members, input you have provided us with during the surveys that we take after each panel meeting. We will do our best to also incorporate the questions and remarks that you have on these panel meetings in this webinar. Of course, much more details can be found on our FWO website. Also, the PowerPoint presentation of today's webinar can be found on that website. And afterwards, we will also submit the broadcast of this webinar on the FWO website. I think we all hoped that this slide no longer will be needed in the 2022 evaluation procedure, but unfortunately it is. So the COVID crisis also hit hard here in Belgium, in Flanders specifically, and it has a huge impact on the life of researchers, of our applicants, but of course also on the research and the career development of some of the candidates. So in order to address that aspect, we invited all the applicants to mention throughout their application form in the section career breaks, personal statement, mobility, in short, in every specific topic where they think it could have an influence to address specific consequences and influences of the COVID-19 crisis. And as a panel member, we would like to ask you to take these elements into account during your assessments. Also on COVID-19 impact, the pre-selection meetings will be online in 2022, but we hope that we can all invite you in September to have a physical meeting here in Brussels, in our new offices. Actually, we are moving to a new office building in July, and so we hope to invite you all here in September in Brussels at FWO headquarters. During this webinar, we will give you some specific insights on the PhD fellowship programs, the evaluation and selection process, and also, as been said, your specific task as a panel member. Before we kick off, I would like to give you some general information about FWO. Our research council was founded in 1928, and at that time we were one of the first research councils in Europe. And actually, since then, our main mission has not changed that much. That means that we still stand for the funding of fundamental and strategic-oriented research. And in order to do so, we offer a broad range of funding schemes. We are aiming on individual researchers through the fellowship programs, which are on the discussion here this morning. We have also postdoctoral fellowships, and of course, a large range of mobility grants. We offer also funding programs aiming on research teams with regular research projects, our SBO program, our Brain Game program, Odysseus, and so on. FWO is in Flanders also responsible for the funding of research infrastructure, both national and international. For example, the S3 funding is going through FWO, through each of the Flemish participants. And the last part is we also offer scientific awards, scientific prizes, together with some private partners. The way we do things at FWO is based on a bottom-up principle. That means that researchers can come to us with new innovative ideas, and you as an expert perform the scientific evaluation. Almost all of the programs at FWO are bottom-up, so we don't have strategic teams or something that is necessary to address in all the applications. It's really up to the applicants, with the exception of some minor funding programs that we are offering. It's also based on scientific excellence, and of course it's an inter-university competition, also including some research institutes, and that means that it's a hard and harsh competition. I come back on the success rate, the selection rate on the next slide, but in any case it's a tough competition, we can say. FWO also stands, of course, for transparent and equal opportunities. So on this infographic, you can see some important key numbers and facts about FWO. Our annual budget in 2022 will be 440 million euro that we can spend on new innovative research projects and fellowships. You can see on the graph below that 75% approximately of our funding is going to fundamental research programs. 16% is going to strategic basic research. Also, the fellowships that are under discussion here this morning belongs to that part. Clinical research is only 4%, but that's really a specific program that we are offering for clinical research. Clinical research is also included in some of the other topics like fundamental research and the strategic part. And of course, the infrastructure I already addressed you before is 6% of our budget. You can also see that today FWO funds directly or indirectly through research projects more than 4,200 researchers, and that makes it one of the larger players here in Belgium. I also addressed that we are stand for equal opportunities, so it's really important to point out that the gender balance is monitored very closely. For the moment, on a pre-doctoral level, we have a 50-50 balance between female and male researchers. On a postdoctoral level, you see that only 40% of the postdoctoral fellowships in function today are female and 60% male. I would also add there that the selection rate between female and male researchers is the same, but what we see is on a postdoctoral level that there is less applications are submitted by female researchers. Flanders is a small region, so internationalization is very important. You can see there that on a pre-doctoral level, 1 out of 5 of our fellows is coming from abroad, or non-Belgian citizens. On a postdoctoral level, that's 40% even. So that's quite substantial, and we think it's really important to stimulate brain circulation in Europe and also, of course, here in Flanders. Last part of this slide is the success rate, the selection rate I already mentioned before. You can see that last year in the call 2021, selection rate for PhD strategic basic research was 30%. That's not that low, you can say, because you see the other funding schemes there, it's much lower. For projects, it's only 1 out of 5 that can be funded, but nevertheless, 30% also means there that it's a tough competition. So that was in short what I had to address you at the beginning of this webinar. I'm very glad to give the floor now to my colleague Steven to guide you further on in the context of the PhD fellowships.
Okay, so thank you, Hans, for the introduction. So actually, you will be acting as an evaluator within our PhD fellowship programs, or within one of our PhD fellowship programs, to be a bit more precise. And actually, what we aim to support here is young researchers for a total duration of up to 4 years. So initially a 2-year term and then a renewal for 2 additional years. And with young researchers, we mean that actually they should have obtained their master's less than 3 years ago at the time of the submission of the application, which is the 1st of March. And at that time should also have less than 18 months of scientific experience. we expect from the applicants to carry out their project at the PhD level at the Flemish University, and of course they can collaborate with a co-hosting institution, for instance, another Flemish or federal research institution. And actually within our PhD fellowship programs, we have two different types which are running in parallel, and both of them are oriented towards basic research topics. But while the fundamental research line is oriented purely at curiosity-driven researchers, you will be acting as an evaluator within our strategic basic research program. It's oriented towards basic research, but it should also have some application potential. And actually, there are three core aims which we aim to reach within this funding scheme, which are also very important during the evaluation of the different applications submitted within our call. And is that first, of course, we aim to support our researchers who have the potential to develop into strategically thinking and innovation-oriented scientists. So the candidates, they're an important aspect within the evaluation procedure. And of course, we also expect them to come up with a research project which is challenging. So it should have an important contribution to the state of the art. So it should be original research. And then the third thing, which is clearly different from curiosity-driven research, is that within this funding program, we aim to support strategic research. The research itself, it should have a goal. So on mid to long term, in case of course, scientific success, it could have the potential to lead to innovative applications, so new products, services, etc. So the economic added value is also an important aspect within the evaluation, of course. So the applicants, they should demonstrate that their research could have added value for specific companies or a specific industrial sector, or it can be in line with the Flemish socioeconomic transition priorities. These are broad priorities: health, smart resources, energy, and so on. But of course, the focus here should be on the economic added value. Within this funding scheme, we have in total 24 expert panels and one different panel for a small top-down program since last year. And each of these panels consists of approximately 12 experts, and each panel is moderated by a representative of the Research Foundation Flanders. The majority of these experts, they're coming from outside of Flanders, and at least 1/3 in total is also coming from the industrial R&D business enterprise sector, and also to give a clear insight on the applicability and etc. Of the research proposals submitted. I'd also like to stress here that the applicants themselves, they have to choose for one of these expert panels so that fits best their project proposal. We gave as guidance to the applicants to submit their application based on the research methodology and not the application field of their research. And of course, this choice is the responsibility of the candidate. So should you have any doubts whether a proposal is actually submitted to the right panel, and if there's a clear consensus that the application itself is out of scope, then you have the possibility to reject that specific application. So, and now I will go a little more into detail on the different steps within the evaluation and selection process. I will go a little more into detail about the process overview, the evaluation criteria, the selection process, your role as panel member, and as well, we will give some more information on the timeline of this call. So we have a single submission, two-phase evaluation and selection process, and actually this scheme gives a clear overview of the evaluation and selection process. So in the first phase, we will have a remote assessment. So for each application, 3 panel members will act as an internal reviewer. So of course, no external peer review for this funding scheme. And then we will have an online panel meeting. So this is a pre-selection step where we try to come to a consensus scoring and ranking. So for some candidates, it will end after this step. So these proposals will be rejected, and one of the internal reviewers then has the possibility to submit feedback, which will eventually goes to the applicant, of course. And then, of course, also some applications will be retained for the second phase of the evaluation and selection process. And then in the second phase, all candidates who will make it to that phase will have the opportunity to present themselves and their research topic within in an interview where you will actually see the candidates live and have the possibility to ask some questions and then judge also the candidate's performance as well as the project and the application potential in a meeting. And then, of course, we will give the best candidates their grant, and then for other candidates, of course, they will not be able to obtain their fellowship. And again, for each of these applications, one of the panel members will also act as a person responsible for providing feedback to the candidate. So having said that, I'm glad to pass on the word to my colleague Dirk.
Okay, thank you, Steven. In all our fellowship programs, assessing the candidate, the competence and the potential of the candidate is of course of utmost importance. And I will start with some general concerns on how we assess the candidate. In fact, FWO and you as a panel member will pay attention to a variety of researcher profiles, a variety of research results. Hereby, we are following an international trend, so to speak, that is moving away from the classical one-sided focus on output criteria like publications, bibliometrics, and so on, moving towards a broader view on scientific accomplishments. And this is also important for the very young research profiles that we see, of course, in the ASB and the PhD fellowship programs. So we invite the candidates, as young as they are, to give us evidence in the application form, evidence, we give them the opportunity to demonstrate the versatility in the way they are building up their very, very early research career by telling us about a range of scientifically relevant activities, skills they have acquired and they are planning to acquire, experiences like internships, and also the first achievements in their early research careers. Therefore, compared to last year, we have adapted slightly the application form as well as the evaluation criteria and the scoring grids. Also, as a general remark, we invite you to take into account the scientific seniority of the candidates and raise and lower the bar accordingly. For instance, a last year master student should be a little bit differently judged, should expect a little bit less from these candidates than from PhD candidates that have already started. The idea is, the rule is that the PhD candidates can have a maximum of 18 months of scientific experience at the day of the submission, so the 1st of March. Then the evaluation criteria. So in total there are 3: the candidate, as said, the very PhD project, and the application potential. For the candidate, we are looking a little bit differently in assessing the candidate's criterion pre-selection compared to interview. In the pre-selection, we're trying to find a balance in assessing the very study results, so the academic education records, and on the other hand, the motivation of the candidate and relevant competences as evidenced in the application form. For the study results, we're mainly looking at how does the candidate is positioned in their own study group by using a percentile number. But also other equivalent evidence of standing out, of having distinguished themselves during the studies can be useful to the assessment. Then we are looking to the candidate in terms of motivation, research interest, What can they tell about their activities, skills, and experiences that they have done in the past, and that they are actually planning to improve their own research profile. And that's also, of course, is linked to their scientific background and the competences to start performing the PhD project, the PhD research. And during the interview, we're trying to see whether the candidate can confirm the image that has been given in the application form, in the written application. And we are trying to assess the potential, the competence as an independent researcher, as well as the potential competence as a so-called strategically thinking and innovation-oriented researcher, where we are assessing their insight in the strategic importance and that they know how to position the project in the innovation landscape, should have some notions of the economic landscape, IPR, what players are there, what innovations are upcoming, and so on. In general, the independent researcher profile is tested by asking questions on their knowledge in their own research field, the insight in the project they have submitted. They should know every step, be able to explain every step, and position scientifically the project related to the state of the art. And also during the interview, you will be able to assess their reasoning skills, their critical scientific mindset, and their motivation. The project criterion, these are the classical parameters on originality, risks, methodology, and feasibility. Is the project feasible to get a PhD in 4 years? And is that also using risk mitigation? Then there is the strategic character of the proposal. How important is a strategic character for the research approach? How relevant is that research with a goal, as said? And secondly, how important can the outcome of the PhD project be on the longer term for potential users, and how large can that impact be? How large is the user group, and so on? Then, as you see, the scores of the 3 criteria are weighted accordingly. 50% is going to the candidate criterion. Now we're using a score scale from 0 till 7. Next slide. Some more detail on how to assess the criterion candidate, and more specifically the study results, so the academic education results. So we're asking for a percentile or perhaps the rank in their own study group for positioning their study results for their relevant master. So for most people, that's the master that they have obtained or they will obtain by using their global study result, the global percentage, to compare that with the other students in their class. If the candidates are still in their final master year, they should refer to their bachelor, their academic bachelor degree that they have obtained. We have offered them score tables with the percentiles from each of the Flemish universities. Those candidates, 20-30% with a non-Flemish diploma, we have asked to contact their institute, and if numbers were not available, they should confer to the narrative section, which also is important for the Flemish candidates, where they can clarify their study result and the percentile present or not. But also important there to tell the panel about other evidence, how they were able during the studies to distinguish themselves, to stand out in a way, referring, for instance, to their master thesis, to very high marks and dedicated courses that may be relevant for the PhD study, and so on. Also, they can talk about the other studies they performed, the advanced master, specific courses they took, and so on. And also, if they're in their last master year, and if available, they can also give evidence of their first master year study results. On their motivation and competences, so there are two text boxes that you will also see in the applications. First, as before, the motivation statement, where candidates are invited to tell you about their research interest and their personal motivation to become a young and independent researcher. What is their scientific background? What are their competences that they can bring in to start a PhD research that they have developed, starting to develop during their master's thesis or their first 1.5 year as a PhD researcher, for instance. Also, they can talk about the skills that they have been building up and that are further to be acquired. Typically experimental skills, presentation or writing skills, and we should also be able to see a glimpse of commitment qualities, perseverance qualities in order to start up a PhD. Then there is a brand new text box compared to previous years on where they can make a narrative on their scientific activities, their experiences, their early achievements that they have obtained or that they are planning and on the way to acquire. So typically we invite them to tell the panel about their first timid steps as potential scientists and also what their plans are to improve their competences. Referring again to the master thesis, so they are invited to tell you what they have done, what was the goal, what are the first results, and so on. But also, if there are available, they can mention about their publications and other scientific output like data, software, prototypes. Maybe they got an award for their thesis and so on. And also other experiences that they have done and that they are planning, dedicated trainings, internships, for instance, in companies, presentations on conferences, collaborations abroad, and so on. So any contact, internship, research days in industrial R&D, specifically for the SB program, are interesting for the assessment, as well as in a nutshell, starting entrepreneurial and innovation skills. And also mobility, of course, is always an important part of the assessment. Going from international to national mobility, but also intersectoral mobility, so moving towards the industrial environment. Okay, so the next slide is for my colleague Inge.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dirk. This slide focuses on the importance of our scoring grid. This scoring grid will be sent to all of you. It is also being used in all of our SB panels, irrespective of the scientific scopes of the panel. So with the aim to assure a uniform scoring process across all our panels. And of course, also to help you to distinguish a better candidate from a good candidate within your own panel. To do so, we encourage you to get acquainted with all scoring criteria and the descriptors for each of the criteria, as well as with the full scoring range, which, as you can see here, turns from red, which means unacceptable, to dark green, which means outstanding. From our experience in the past, we see that panel members have a tendency to score in the dark green zone. However, we ask you to take into account that in our scoring system, a score of 4 is being set as a calibration line, since it means good and thus acceptable for funding. So this is the 4 is the threshold level for project and candidate score for being funded. Also be aware that the excellent or outstanding scores are reserved for the top 10 or 5% best candidates or projects according to the international standards applicable to PhD funding. On the next slide, you see how the fellowships, how we distribute the fellowships. So for the 2022 call, our Flemish government, namely the Department of Economy, Science and Innovation, provides a quota of almost 200 SB fellowships. These quota are being distributed among the panels according to the number of applications in each panel. In other words, a bigger panel gets a higher number of fellowships than a smaller panel. So 90% of the available fellowships are being granted directly by you at the end of the interview session to the best ranked candidates. The other 10% are assigned to the best remaining candidates over all panels by what we call the wildcard system, but we will come back later to this. For the pre-selection phase, each panel can invite the double of its quota. This means that, for instance, a panel which can grant 5 fellowships is allowed to invite maximum 10 candidates to the interview. This means that during the interview, you can grant 1 out of 2 candidates, or a success rate of 50% during the interview. So this final granting is for the best ranked candidates in your panel and with a minimal threshold score of 4 for candidate and project, and 2 for application potential. In the next step, once all evaluations are finished, the best remaining candidates who received a wildcard are ranked all over the panels after normalization or standardization of the scores to assign the remaining 10% fellowships and also to set up a reserve list. The next slide brings us to you, and so your role and tasks as a panel member. So each of the 24 SB panels has on average 12 members. As you know, your major task is the evaluation of the PhD applications, and for this, FWO assigns each application to 3 panel members and invites you to submit an evaluation report using the template and the scoring grid provided by us. In addition to writing the evaluation report, you are also responsible for writing the feedback, which is of utmost importance for the candidate. So this is the role of one of the 3 evaluators who is appointed at the start of the evaluation procedure as what we call the rapporteur. So you will know from the start for which applications you have to write the feedback report. An additional task is the review of the activity reports, but I will come back later to this. So we have I just wanted to add, we have 2 panel meetings. The first one is the pre-selection meeting late May, early June, which independent of pandemics is always online. And then the second one, which is the interview session in September, which, as mentioned before, will take place here with us in the new FWO buildings in Brussels. So the panel is moderated by a member of the FWO staff who usually has several panels under his or her guidance, and who usually also has some scientific background in the scientific domain of the panel. The SB moderator provides procedural guidance regarding the conflict of interest rules and also the other FWO regulations, and keeps a strict eye on the scoring, which should follow those criteria as outlined in the scoring grid. The SB moderator also provides scientific guidance in assigning the applications to the panel members according to their respective expertise. And once the report's submitted, the SB moderator prepares and chairs the pre-selection and interview meeting and does a final proofreading of all the feedback reports at the end of the process. This brings us to the timeline. So from March 1st, which was the deadline for the applicants for submitting their application, until late last week, we had the eligibility check. We ended up with, let me check, 643 eligible candidates, plus in a specific other panel, we have a new panel, we have 11 candidates. So this week, you will all be invited to fill in. So we will send you a message and invite you to fill in the possible occurrences of conflicts of interest for each application, as well as your give a self-score indicating your familiarity with the topic. This is of use for distributing, of course, the applications among all panel members. So then we expect you to start writing the evaluation reports. The report should be handed in 2 weeks before the meetings, the pre-selection meetings. The pre-selection meetings, they take place from May 31st to June 10th. And then in September, we have the interview sessions, followed by the editing of the feedback reports. And now, as a small intermezzo, we would like to draw your attention to a short clip from our colleagues of the Royal Society on unconscious bias. Please have a look.
The unconscious mind is amazing. It can process vastly more information than our conscious mind by using shortcuts based on our background, cultural environment, and personal experiences to make almost instantaneous decisions about everything around us. The snag is, it's wrong quite a lot of the time, especially on matters that need rational thinking. Here's a classic example. A bat and a ball cost £1 10p. If the bat costs £1 more than the ball, how much does the ball cost? Most people, including over 50% of students at some of the world's leading universities, get the answer wrong and say 10p. The answer is actually 5p. Many of us choose 10p without thinking. This is because our unconscious mind uses instinct, not analysis. So our unconscious is fallible. It's also biased. It makes snap judgments of people we meet, categorizing them according to gender, social and other characteristics. In milliseconds, we judge whether somebody is like us and belongs to our in-group. These are the people we favor. So men might favor men, while women might favor women. However, we can belong to different in-groups, and we like to be part of an in-group that's powerful, which could mean a woman favoring a man over a woman. That's unconscious bias. All of us have it, and it colors our decisions without our realizing. For example, research reveals that if I were a man, you would be more likely to be nodding in agreement right now, because people pay more attention to a male voice. The Royal Society fosters excellence in science, but this can only be achieved if we select from the widest range of talent. And that's not possible if unconscious bias is narrowing down the field for non-scientific reasons. To lessen the impact of unconscious bias, which is easier for us to notice in others, we are raising the awareness of unconscious bias to members of our selection and appointment panels. We're encouraging panel members to deliberately slow down decision-making, reconsider reasons for decisions, question cultural stereotypes, and monitor each other for unconscious bias. We can't cure unconscious bias, but with self-awareness, we can address it.
So, having had a broad overview of the evaluation and selection process, I'm now coming a little bit more into detail about what we expect from you to perform as a panel member. Actually, there are, let's say, 3 different steps. So first is the preparation phase, then there's the pre-selection phase, and then there's the phase for the interviews of the candidate. So let's then proceed with the preparation phase. So of course, it all ends with getting access to the different proposals, and actually all access to the grant applications, the submission of your evaluation reports, as well as your feedback reports, is done electronically via our e-portal. So actually, this will mean so the e-portal itself, it's available at our website, fwo.be. There's a link indicated on our website as well. So we will all provide you with a login and a password. And as a panel member, you will see when after logging in, there's a dedicated tab in e-portal with the notification panel member, which speaks for itself. And here you can communicate your confidence levels or potential conflicts of interest and submit your evaluation reports. There's also a dedicated dashboard where all reviewer tasks will be also nicely summed up, and you also have the possibility via that platform, if you want to access all proposals submitted within a dedicated panel. So that's the tab which is indicated on the right side of the slide. This is My Panels tab, where you can download all applications in once. So should you also become a bit more familiar with all applications submitted within the panel. So next slide, please. So the first step before we can actually allocate the different applications to all panel members, and this will be done very shortly, is of course asking you for your confidence rates and also potential conflicts of interests. So we will ask you to indicate your confidence rate for all of the applications with a confidence rate of 5, meaning that you're a real expert on the topic. And of course, for applications which are further away from your core expertise, this can lead, of course, to a lower confidence rate. Also, you can indicate potential conflicts of interest for each of the applications. So should you be affiliated with an institution which also belongs to the institution of the applicant, then there's already some information pre-filled in within the e-portal. And of course, as Hans said during the introduction, of course, fair and transparent procedures are quite important. And I'd like to mention here, of course, that you will be acting, of course, as an independent researcher and, of course, not as a representative of a certain host institution or a representative or of a certain scientific field or something like that. So in the very exceptional case, should you be contacted by the applicant or the supervisor about how the interview went and so on, always refer to the FWO, and also please notify us in these extraordinary cases, of course. And based on this information, we will assign the applications to the different panel members, of course. We will take into account your confidence levels with the different applications, also potential conflicts of interest. But please keep in mind that this is quite a difficult task, because the confidence levels for the different applications might be a little vary. For some applications, all of you might know a lot, and while for others, there might be not 3 panel members who are really close to the field of that specific application. So it might also occur that you will receive some applications which are a bit further away from your core background. Having said already a few times, is that for each of the applications, 3 panel members will act as internal reviewer, and one of these internal reviewers will also be responsible to compile feedback to the candidates, of course. The allocation itself, you will receive an invitation, email, and guidelines to evaluate these proposals. So in case there should be, for instance, let's say a conflict of interest which was not notified immediately, you can refuse this assignment, but please try to talk timely to us first, then we can find for an appropriate solution to that. And then, of course, there's let's say one of the most important steps in the evaluation process is, of course, the drafting up of the internal evaluation reports. because your reports itself, they will serve, of course, together with the two evaluation reports of your colleague panel members as a starting point for the pre-selection meeting. When drafting up your internal evaluation report, you of course have to take into account the application itself together with the score grid, and we will ask you to provide some comments on the different evaluation criteria and also award a numerical appreciation, a numerical score for each of the evaluation criteria. We would like, of course, to ask you to respect the submission deadline as closely as possible. We ask you usually to submit your reports 1 week before the panel meeting, to also have a decent preparation for the panel meeting itself. So your report, together with the reports of your colleagues, will lead to a preliminary ranking for the pre-selection phase. For that, we use the average scores for each of the criterion. This will be served as the start values of the panel meeting for the pre-selection phase. So on this slide, you will see a draft about what we expect from you for your internal evaluation reports within our e-portal. We can give you as guidance for the reports to be concise, but try to add, of course, some value as well. So, of course, please do not copy-paste, of course, entire parts of the proposal, the grades of the candidates, publication numbers, and so on. But try to substantiate your score, of course, by using, on one hand, using the score grid as closely as possible, to have also a fair score for all of the candidates within the panel, and also try to give some appreciation for your scores. So try to give some strengths, weaknesses, and also suggestions for improvement for the candidates in the project, of course. You know that from previous slides that we have three criteria which are quite important: the candidate aspect, the project, and the application potential. And for each of these three criteria, we have two sub-criteria within the e-portal. For the candidate, we have the study results, the motivation and competences. And for the project, we have the scientific quality, and then also the approach and the feasibility. For the application potential itself, we have the strategic relevance of the research approach in the attainment of the ultimate applicability of the research, and as well as the strategic impact of the proposal itself. And for each of these sub-criteria, you can include strengths, weaknesses, and actually also a small conclusion why a certain applicant should not be funded, or on the other hand, should be funded for sure, of course. And then there's also a pick list for which you can attribute a numerical score ranging from 7 to 0, and with 7 being the clearly outstanding proposals, of course. And actually, I will go again a little more into detail on the different evaluation criteria for the pre-selection phase. A lot of these things might have already been told by some of my colleagues, but these are actually crucial. So we'd like to stress a few points of attention here. For the study results, we have on one hand the academic accreditation record, so the percentiles here might be important. But of course, try to score these very carefully. So try to assess whether some valuable percentile data have been supported by the candidate, and especially be a little more cautious when it concerns small study groups or candidates who come from outside of Flanders. And of course here also check the study results narrative of the candidates, whether they might explain some lower results for certain courses and so on. So whether they can actually frame their research academic education records. And then there's also the motivation and the competences of the candidate, whether he or she has already the relevant skills and experience, relevant background and competences for the research project, and if there should be some deficiencies on whether he or she has already a plan to compensate for that one, for instance. And then we have the project. These are quite standard criteria. The only point of attention is, of course, here that I'd like to mention is that it should be a standalone 4-year PhD project, so that the applicant itself, it should also be feasible to do it in 4 years for a single PhD student. And then there's the application potential. So it should be, of course, in case of scientific success, lead to economic added value. So the economic part, of course, is quite important here. But ideally, of course, to a broad set of actors or users, and it might not be, it may not be embedded into the enterprise R&D horizon of a single company, because if it's completely oriented towards a single company, then it should be actually lead to a quite low score, because we do have a dedicated funding scheme and a related agency here in Flanders. This is, of course, explicitly not the case to collaborate exclusively with one company within this funding scheme. Okay, next slide, please.
Yeah, Steven, before we go to the next slide, we have one question received. It's in connection with what you just discussed. How are the recommendations by the supervisors, or the lack of one such recommendation, taken into account during the evaluation process?
Well, actually, we asked the supervisor to submit a recommendation letter. So of course here they can indicate the strengths and the weaknesses of a candidate, of course. So this is indeed also an element which can be taken into account in the evaluation process. So should a supervisor, let's say, have not submitted a recommendation letter, then it might also be an indication about the level of guidance, of course, that the candidate will receive. But of course, I would say that you have to be a little more cautious, of course, that you do not evaluate the writing skills of the promoter, of course, concerning that aspect. Okay, so you have seen the different evaluation criteria. As already also said, is that besides your textual appreciation for a certain candidate, also the scoring grid itself is quite important here. With a score of 4 or 5 out of 7, this means that all items should apply for either the candidate, the project, or the application potential, of course. So a score above 4 is in fact worth of funding. So it's already proposals which have got a clear contribution to the state of the art and also contains a high risk, high gain aspects and so on. Should this not be the case, then you should opt for a score, of course, lower than that. And then on the other hand, if it consists, let's say, really pioneering research with a very clear gain to the state of the art, very high risk, high gain, a high level of scientific risks and so on, then you can go to the really high scores, the excellent, outstanding ranges between 6 and 7, of course. The same is true for the candidate and the application potential. So important here is that for scores between 4 and 7, all the items within our score grid should apply, and if it's not the case, then you should go for a lower score. So then I'm giving the word to Dirk again.
Thank you, Steven. Then, of course, once you have all timely submitted your internal evaluation reports, it's time together to prepare the pre-selection meeting, which, as said, is online. So the main first preparation is by FWO staff, where we make up to start with a provisional ranking based on the average scores of the 3 internal reviewers for each application. We will have a look at how consistent for each application the 3 scores and the 3 comments by the 3 reviewers are. If there are divergences on individual scores and reports, and that of course we'll bring on the table to discuss within the whole panel to make a final consensus score for each of the criteria for each candidate. We also prepare other possible issues like issues on parallel funding, double funding, plagiarism, out of scope applications, and so on. Then you will receive quite timely a briefing mail where we provide you with the results of our preparation, also provide you with some statistics on your own scoring behaviors compared to the others. Also interesting to have some self-reflection. Am I too severe? Am I too mild, for instance? We will instruct you on the meeting scenario and the procedure in order to have efficient discussions, which is important if you're in an online, when you are in an online situation, as it is for the pre-selection meeting. How should you prepare the pre-selection meeting? Well, you should be able to prepare your own discussion items. For instance, if we notify you that for a certain evaluation there's a high divergence, it's up to you to have a look again at your own report and see where the differences are with the 2 other reviewers and make your point during the meeting. You're also free, of course, and invited to suggest new discussion items that are not suggested yet by us. And you're certainly invited to check the whole bunch, all applications, which you can find in the ePortal under My Panels. You also have access to all reviews of your colleagues as well in the ePortal. And the bottom line is that the discussion for all applications is open to all panel members, and all decisions that will be made are consensus decisions. So at the very pre-selection meeting, so to repeat, the material, the documents that we will be basing ourselves on is the very application, the scoring grid, 3 internal reviews, and the provisional ranking based on the average internal review scores. So during the meeting, the online meeting, we will make use of a so-called scoreboard, where we can adjust, fine-tune the scores per main criterion, candidate, project, and application potential. Mind that your individual scores no longer play a role in this step of the process. We are basing ourselves on the average internal reviewing scores, average of the 3 reviewers for the 3 main criteria. So we do not make use anymore of sub-criteria, but only the 3 main criteria. And then our role and your role is to confirm or amend or discuss or adjust these average scores for each of the 3 criteria. So we are moving during that meeting towards the final pre-selection consensus scores to draw the line and to see who will be invited for the interview and who is eliminated at this stage. So again, these are full panel decisions, and the main goal is to make a decision on the cutoff line for the pre-selection phase. Yes, Hans.
Yeah, we have another question. Should second submissions be scored somewhat differently, as these candidates, of course, will use the reports of the year before?
Yes, in the project description, the resubmitting candidates are invited to tell the panel in what way they have taken into account the feedback of the previous year and what are the main changes in their proposal. Of course, during the year that has passed since the first submission, also their personal track record may have been richer than it was the year before, so they can also stress on that. If possible, we try to allocate the resubmission to the same reviewers, but or at least 2 of the 3 reviewers that then have a comparison with the application the year before. Okay, after the pre-selection, you're directly invited to prepare the feedback of the decisions of the discussion. So one of the 3 internal reviewers was designated to do that for each candidate. So we also tried to distribute that quite evenly amongst you. How do you do that? You make a kind of a synthesis from the 3 internal evaluation reports, taking into account also discussion conclusions of the very pre-selection meeting. In the template that you will find in the e-portal, you will see that the consensus scores of the pre-selection are automatically added in the form. For those applications, those candidates that are not retained, you should submit because your feedback is final in this stage. For those candidates invited for the interview, we strongly recommend you to make a draft feedback proposal to be updated after the and finalized after the interviews. To keep your memory fresh, the deadline for these feedback documents is 1 week after the pre-selection meeting. Some more details, because the feedback is very important. Let's say for the reputation of the FWO, and of course the candidates are very eager to receive comments on how they did perform, how good, how bad their application form was, and why finally they are or they are not funded. Therefore, and this is already suggested also in the internal reporting, so before the pre-selection meeting, to divide your comments into strengths, weaknesses, some conclusions, why the application, why the candidate, why the doctoral thesis should or should not be funded. And also very important is to add some suggestions for improvement in the CV of the candidate, in the application potential, in the originality of the project, for instance. So the main message to you is try to add value using a concise still but meaningful feedback for the candidate, which should reflect not just your own opinion but the panel consensus decision. So each of the 3 scores that are communicated to the candidates should be well substantiated and should be able to referred to by the candidate as well to the scoring grid. So in this stage, the scoring grid for the pre-selection. So include, don't forget to include also remarks, so make a synthesis remarks from the other internal reviews. So not external, that is still a typo. That will be corrected in the final version of the slides. So mind that the candidates do not receive the individual reviews, but only your synthesis, your feedback. And of course, we remind you again, it's not worthwhile. It's certainly not recommended to copy paste data from the very application of the candidates. That's quite obvious that the candidate knows quite well what they have written themselves. And so rather than mere facts, you should be able to give appreciations and findings of the evaluation. Then, so towards the month of September, we are ready to prepare the interview panel meeting, preparing the interviews. So as said, the scoring grid for the candidate is different in a way from the scoring grid for the pre-selection. For project and application potential, we use the same scoring grid, and also the scores during the interview should still remain, unless new ideas are popping up, new appreciation, new elements are urging you to change the scores of project application potential. It's a little bit different for the candidate criterion, where we now focus mainly on the potential competence, as well as an independent researcher, as well as an innovation-oriented researcher, and the questions, and therefore you can also use the score grid to formulate your questions, should be based on these elements that are summed up again here. So is the candidate following, is he able to use reasoning skills to reason along with your comments? Is he critical in her scientific mindset? Does she come over as motivated and so on? But also, is the candidate able to show you that she has an idea on strategic importance of the project? Does she have notions of the economic landscape that she's putting a proposal to that direction, and so on? So prepare your questions in order to gauge the candidate's mainly potential competence as a PhD fellow. And therefore you can also, of course, use questions on the project, details on the project and on the application potential as well. And about the very interview meeting, I give the word to Inge.
Yes, this slide gives an overview of the interview meeting itself. So first, the candidate is asked to give a short presentation as an elevator pitch of 5 minutes. This gives the candidate the opportunity to introduce himself and the project and to add some additional achievements since the time of submission, such as information on the master thesis or some preliminary data obtained so far. This pitch is then followed by a 15-minute interactive question and answer discussion. And once the candidate leaves the room, the panel discusses the quality of the answers given and assigns a new consensus score, mainly focusing on the candidate criterion. So in total, we count about 30 minutes per candidate. At the end of the meeting, after all candidates have been interviewed, we then have a look at the final ranking, which offers the opportunity to fine-tune the scores before assigning the final status. And this final status is or the application or the candidate gets a grant, which is directly approved according to the panel's quota, or the candidate gets a wild card, that's for the best remaining candidates, and then who make a chance of 10% of the total grants, and then or rejected if one of the scores is below the quality threshold. During the interview itself, it is important that you cover all sub-criteria as detailed in the scoring grid. And as I said before, or as has been said before, typically the three internal reviewers take the lead here, but all panel members may participate. So the purpose of this interactive discussion is to thoroughly challenge the candidate, going progressively from an easygoing discussion to a more gently provoking interaction. Then to test the critical mindset, some unexpected non-specific questions can also be asked. Overall, we ask you to treat all candidates fair and equally, taking our guidelines into account and also especially taking into account the probable stress experienced by the candidate. On the next slide, I will quickly go through the scoring during the interview. This slide mainly shows that we have to assign a new score for the candidate. This score may implicitly take into account the findings from the pre-selection, so from on the paper-based findings, but it should take into account the interactions, the scientific quality of the interactions you had with him or her during the interview. So at the end, it should reflect the potential competence of the candidate as a researcher. The scores for the project and the application potential may also be adjusted if during the interview some new relevant elements were brought up. Then on the next slide, this is about the status that we have to assign at the end of the meeting, which is, as I said before, or approved. That's for the best ranked candidates with a minimum score of 4 for the candidate scoring, 4 for the project, and 2 for the application potential. So these get directly granted according to the panel quota. The remaining candidates with a minimum score of 4, 4, and 2, and also the ones with a high total score, which are ranked in between 2 other wildcards, but this will become more clear during our scoring. The FWO staff will guide you in this. So these candidates with a high total score within a ranking will also get a wildcard, and then we have the last category rejected for the other candidates. What you should know is that the wildcard, it's actually a quality label, as the application which received the wildcard actually deserves funding if the budget would be available, if we had an unlimited budget, as these candidates ended up with a score of 4 or more, which means very good. So the wildcards at the end are ranked over all panels, so over all 24 panels, using a standardized total scores, and they will be used to award the 10% of available remaining available fellowships. They also serve as a reserve list in case the selected candidates withdraw early after the granting decision. And in addition, universities or institutions also use our wildcard system for granting their students for the selection of some bridging or specific fellowships, so based on our wildcard classification, so for the funding within their own organization. Yes, Hans?
Yeah, Inge, we also received another question. How many candidates will be selected in total, so by each of the panels, and in consequence, how many days will take the final selection step, so the interview phase?
The interview phase, when we have online interviews, we have, so it depends very much on the number of applications within the panel. Most of you already during when we select, you are already aware of the dates in September. Some of you, for some panels, we already know from our experience in the past, we know that the interview meeting will last 2 days. You will get a notice of this somewhere next week, I believe, to really, now that we have the eligibility checklist done. So you will get informed about the number of days that the interview, but I missed the first question, didn't I, Hans?
Yeah, the first question was, it's in connection, Inge, how many candidates can be selected by each of the panels? But as you pointed out, it depends on the number of applications submitted to a specific panel, and also that has, of course, an influence on the duration of the interview phase.
Yes. And just one small addition here, as we said before, the success rate during the interviews is 50%, so we can grant 1 out of 2 of the candidates during the interview. So this then brings us to the next slide, which is the feedback. Dirk already insisted on the importance of the feedback. So after the interview, we will ask you to submit a feedback report for the candidates who made it to the interview. This will be sent together with the final consensus score to the candidate. And as also said by Dirk for the feedback after the pre-selection, this feedback report should take into account all relevant marks made by the other panel members and also findings which came up during the interview. So in short, we expect the feedback report to substantiate the final scores and to be of added value for the candidate. It is also your opportunity as a panel to let the candidates know what you really think of their application. So we ask you to focus on the strengths, weaknesses for all three criteria: candidate, project, and application potential, and also to add some suggestions for improvement, as these suggestions are highly appreciated by the candidates, especially if their application is not retained. What's very important at this stage is that you also include some comments about the interview, as these young candidates are mostly very curious or even worried about how they performed during the interview or how this was their answers were perceived by the panel. So sometimes we see that the panel members, they omit to mention the interview, to mention something about the interview in the feedback, which can be disappointing for the candidate. So we will ask you to submit the feedback report within 1 week after the interview. Then a small minor final task for you panel members concerns the evaluation of the activity reports of the finished PhD fellowships. So after 4 years. For this, you will be given access to all reports through our extranet, but the evaluation itself is prepared by the FWO representative, who will send you the evaluation sheet by mail, asking for comments and or approval. This is scheduled for mid-June. So now I give the word back to Hans for some final comments.
Yeah, thank you, Inge and Dirk and Steven, for this clear and detailed explanation about the different steps of our evaluation procedure. This brings us, in fact, to the end of this webinar. I would like to thank you all for your attention and, of course, once more for accepting to participate in this evaluation process. As you can see on this final slide, we have provided much more details on our website of each of the steps that we have discussed this morning. If you have any additional question, please don't hesitate to contact us directly by phone or by email, and then we will do our best to answer all possible questions. We realize that there are also some questions left in the webinar question box. We will provide you with an answer the following days on each of these questions. For now, I would like to thank you for your attention, and we are all looking forward to see you back in Brussels or online for the panel meetings later on this year. Thank you very much. Have a good day.